This week in the field is viewer Q&A, composition, subject matter, and when to get outside with your camera. Hi everyone, I'm Scott Davenport. Welcome to In the Field. Thanks for joining me today. Today is a viewer Q&A episode. A few weeks ago, I asked everyone, what's your biggest challenge with landscape photography when you're out in the field, the capture side of things? And by far, the number one answer was composition. How do I compose? I'm not sure how to approach the scene. There were a couple of questions about times of day to shoot and what's really good. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but we're going to focus on composition. Now, I did a talk a few weeks ago at a local photo society here in San Diego. It was about seascape photography, but one of the topics was composition. And so I thought I would use images from that presentation to talk about some of the things you can do to help with your composition. So the first one, of course, is leading lines. Leading lines is a classic, but I want to show you a couple of different variations on that. And in this photo, it's not just the leading lines. There's a couple of other things going on here. Number one is they lead somewhere. They lead into the frame. They lead out to that horizon. Secondarily, I'm using the corners. So leading lines plus using your corners. You get those diagonal lines. It adds a level of dynamics to your photo. And using the corners really draws in your viewer, brings their eye into the frame. And that's what you want. In this scene here, you're drawn in probably by this large triangular rock in the center that's pulling you in. And then you hit the horizon. There's some interesting clouds which kind of drift from left to right, and then off to the brightest area of the photo, and you happen to see there's a few surfers out there too. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in that scene. Let's look at another example. This one's a reflection, but again, we're using the corners. This rays of sunbeams, it looks like. It's really just a longer exposure, but the fact that the sky and the clouds were lit up in such a way that they were drawing these lines out into the distance. We hit the horizon. And the nice silhouettes of the other shapes. Those got some angles and some lines that are cutting through the scene. Again, that diagonal aspect to the photo it's drawing in, it's pulling in here. Now this next one, this is an interesting one for leading lines. And at first you look at this and go, well, where's the line? This one's implied. This speaks to the psyche of our brains, and probably what happened for most of you is mentally you sat down in that chair and then you looked over at these rocks. And there's a brighter spot on the rock. Your eye's going to latch onto that. The shape of the rocks start to point out toward the horizon. There's another bit of land in the background. So there's a nice movement of your eye through the frame. So an implied leading line is really cool. That could be a person looking into a direction, or even just the back of a person looking out into a scene. In this case, it's a chair where we envision ourselves being in it. Could be a bench. It could be a ledge that your viewer might be standing on. So all of those things are types of leading lines you can work into your landscapes, or any photos really, any type of genre, to help compose your shot and have your viewer's eye move through the frame. While close second to composition was approaching the scene and deciding what's my subject, what do I point my camera at, what's interesting. For landscapes, what I like to do is I like to let nature give me some clues and let it guide me, especially when I'm going to a place that I'm less familiar with. For spots that we visit again and again, the ones that are in our backyards, you can work those scenes and find different compositions and try a bunch of different things out because it's nearby. So what I mean by letting nature guide you, let's start with this photo here. This scene was all about the sky. That's what was most interesting on location. I kept a very slim sliver of foreground just for context. Got a silhouette of a lifeguard tower, a few people out on the beach, some boats out there, but this scene is all about sky. Now here's one of those scenes where things were interesting both in the sky and in the foreground. This land is very unique. And so I biased the composition to be a little bit more about the land, but the sky was too good to pass up. So I wanted to have mostly equal weighting here. So this breaks a rule of thirds as far as from, bottom to top. But it feels okay for this scene. And again, you can see that this is building on leading lines. We got using the corners. We got clouds coming in from the upper left. We've got land coming in from the lower left and lower right. There's a nice angle on where the surf line is. So a lot of those diagonals working in here. But again, the most interesting thing about this location, what's unique about it, is the land formation. On this third shot, this one's kind of interesting. It touches on what time of day to go shoot. This was, quote unquote golden hour, but there was nothing happening at all in the sky. So nature's telling me there's nothing in the sky, find something else to point your camera at. But after that, I let nature guide me even further. Spent some time sitting there just watching the surf roll around these rocks and thinking in 4 dimensions. I talked about that on a previous In the Field. Watching what the sea foam was doing, it was starting to create these lines wrapping around this foreground rock. So the water would rush in from the lower right corner, swoop around and in between these 2 foreground rocks that are my primary subjects, and then weave their way back out to sea. So again, nature telling me not only don't bother with the sky too much in your frame, a little bit there for context, but find the lines by thinking in that 4th dimension and just watch the scene for a few minutes. So if you've got moving elements through your scene, let those clue you into what lines might be there and what might be the interesting anchor points for your photo. Well, I think my tip of the week is to let nature guide your landscape shoot. A very simplistic approach would be, if the sky is incredibly awesome, great, make that the predominant part of your photo and just find some relatively recognizable item to anchor the foreground. And that might be a very small amount of foreground. It might be an exaggeration of getting up very close to a subject with a wide angle lens, but letting nature tell you that this is all about sky. Conversely, if you've got a relatively empty sky, looking for the more interesting things that are on the ground and biasing your camera toward those subjects. That will do it for this week's In the Field. I hope you liked the Q&A, and if you've got questions, I'd like to hear from you. You can contact me through my website, comments on the video below. Tell a friend about the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, really appreciate it if you did. And I hope to hear what's on your mind photographically. Until next time, my name's Scott Davenport. Happy shooting.